The woman sobbing loudest at my husband Richard's funeral wasn't me. It was his pregnant mistress, Chloe. She stood by the open casket, one hand draped dramatically over her swollen belly, the other clutching a tissue. Her performance was impeccable. The guests shot me looks of pity, assuming I was the poor, clueless wife, too frozen by shock to even cry. They didn't know the truth. The cold in my chest wasn't grief, it was ice. My hands, which had been trembling all morning, were now perfectly still, clenched into tight fists inside my coat pockets. The tears had dried an hour ago. What remained was a silence so sharp it felt like a weapon. I watched her work the crowd, accepting condolences for a loss that wasn't hers. This was the woman my husband had spent our fortune on, a fortune I built with him. A quick, searing flashback hit me. 20 years ago, I sold my father's classic car, the only thing he'd left me, to fund Richard's first business loan. I worked nights as a waitress while he finished his MBA, typing his papers after my shifts, believing in the future he promised. I poured every penny of my small inheritance into his company, a fact memorialized in a single, crucial document he thought was long gone. He'd told me the original partnership agreement, the one that made me a 51% silent partner, had been destroyed in a minor office fire a decade ago. He lied. I had kept the original, tucked away in a safe deposit box he never knew existed. That piece of paper was more than just a document. It was my life's investment, and now it was my ammunition. As Chloe locked eyes with me across the room, offering a small, condescendingly sad smile, the last flicker of sorrow inside me died. The shock turned into a plan, a cold, clear, and methodical plan. She thought she was inheriting a kingdom. She thought my grief made me weak, that I would crumble and hand her everything my husband had promised her. She saw a widow. She had no idea she was looking at a queen about to take back her throne. They had started a war when they thought I wasn't looking, and I was going to end it. The heavy oak door of Richard's study groaned as I pushed it open, a sound of protest from a space that had been forbidden to me for years. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of his expensive cigar smoke and leather, a smell I once found comforting. Now, it was the aroma of betrayal. My heels sank into the plush Persian rug, a gift I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. Every object in this room was a monument to our shared life, a life he had systematically dismantled behind my back. I didn't need to search for the safe. I'd known about it for years, a secret he thought he kept so well. He'd whispered the combination to a business partner on the phone once, thinking I was asleep. I'd written it down on a scrap of paper and tucked it into my old copy of Jane Eyre. Now, I knelt before the hideous landscape painting he loved, my hands steady as I spun the dial. 17329. The click was deafening in the silent house. The metal door swung open. Inside, it wasn't the stacks of cash or the jewelry I expected. It was a neat, cruel archive of my replacement. I reached in and pulled out a thick manila envelope. My heart wasn't racing. It was a cold, hard stone in my chest. The first document was the will, last will and testament of Richard Michael Vance. I skimmed the legalese, my eyes snagging on the devastating clauses. The entirety of his estate, full control of the company, everything left to Chloe and their unborn heir. I was mentioned only in a single, dismissive line, a small, pitying bequest that was less than what he'd spent on her monthly allowance. Beneath the will were the receipts, a paper trail of my own erasure, a receipt for a silver Porsche, the deed to a waterfront condo I'd never seen, bank statements showing monthly transfers to an account in her name. Each deposit was more than he'd ever given me for household expenses. He'd been funding a separate, luxurious life while I budgeted for groceries and paid the landscapers. The sheer scale of it was a physical blow. This wasn't a midlife crisis. It was a calculated, long-term financial siege. I took photos of everything with my phone, the flash illuminating the damning evidence. My hands didn't shake. The grief had been burned away, leaving behind a clean, sharp focus. I needed legal confirmation. I needed to turn this fire in my belly into a weapon. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, a man named Arthur who had handled our corporate law for 2 decades. I slid my phone across his polished mahogany desk. He put on his reading glasses, his expression neutral as he scrolled through the images. Then he stopped at the will. He peered closer, a frown etching deep lines on his forehead. "The notary," he said, tapping the screen. "Eleanor Shaw. I know that name." He typed quickly on his computer. "She's a real estate notary, and according to social media, She's Chloe's college roommate. They're on a girls' trip to Cabo right now. He looked at me, his eyes grave. This is a fraudulent document, plain and simple. The notary is a direct, personal associate of the primary beneficiary. No court in the world would uphold this. This isn't just an affair, Elizabeth. I know, I said, my voice eerily calm. It's a conspiracy. Arthur leaned forward, steepling his fingers. He was planning to disinherit you completely. He was going to hand your company, the one you built with him, to her. Sitting there, in that quiet, professional office, the final piece of my old self shattered. The woman who believed in, for better or worse, was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer. Richard and Chloe hadn't just broken my heart. They had tried to steal my life's work. They had tried to make me a ghost in my own story, but ghosts can't fight back. And I was just getting started. I left Arthur's office with a copy of the fraudulent will and a plan crystallizing in my mind. They thought they were so clever. They thought they had covered every track, but their greatest mistake was underestimating the quiet wife, the one they thought was already broken. I was about to show them what broken could really do. I played the part of the broken widow perfectly. The performance began with the phone call, my voice a fragile, trembling thing I barely recognized. Chloe, I whispered, letting a choked sob echo down the line. It's Elizabeth, Richard's wife. I think we need to talk. I want to do the right thing. For him, I suggested a quiet cafe, a public but neutral ground. She agreed, her voice laced with a caution that was quickly overpowered by Ever. I arrived first, choosing a corner table, my hands clasped around a cooling cup of tea to keep them from looking too steady. I had practiced my reflection in the mirror before leaving. Puffy eyes, pale skin, a general aura of being utterly wrecked. When she walked in, she was a vision of pregnant, performative sorrow. She moved slowly, one hand cradling the swell of her belly like a shield, a black designer dress hugging her frame. She saw me and her face arranged itself into a mask of sympathetic pain. It was all I could do not to smile. Elizabeth, she said, her voice a soft, condescending coo. She slid into the seat opposite me, her gaze sweeping over my simple, unadorned black dress. Thank you for reaching out. This must be so difficult for you. I let my lower lip quiver. It is. I'm just lost. I looked down at my tea, then back at her, making sure my eyes were glistening with unshed tears. I found some paper in Richard's study, a new will. Her eyes widened, a perfect imitation of surprise. You did, I nodded, letting a single, strategic tear escape and trail down my cheek. He wanted you taken care of, you and the baby. I reached out a hand, letting it tremble as I placed it on the table, an inch from hers, a gesture of desperate, pathetic solidarity. I know we've had our differences, but he loved you, and I want to honor that. I want to honor him. I saw it then, the moment the hook sank in. The gleam in her eyes shifted from pity to pure, unadulterated greed. She saw a path of least resistance, a weak, grieving woman, ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom. Elizabeth, that's so generous, she breathed, her voice thick with false emotion. She covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm, her grip possessive. Richard always said you were a good person. Deep down, the condescension was a physical blow, but I absorbed it, letting it fuel the cold fire in my chest. I gave her a watery, grateful smile. I just want his affairs settled smoothly. I was thinking, maybe we could work together. I have access to all the accounts, the lawyers. It's so confusing for me. Maybe you could help. You seem so much more capable. It was subtle, a slight straightening of her spine, a tilt of her chin. She was buying the entire, pathetic narrative. The brilliant, capable Elizabeth, reduced to a confused widow begging her husband's mistress for guidance. It was the story she had always wanted to believe. Of course, she said, her voice now taking on a businesslike tone. It's what Richard would have wanted. For us to be a team, a team. The word was so absurd I almost laughed. I just nodded, sniffling and dabbing at my eyes with a napkin. Thank you, Chloe. You have no idea what this means to me, to not be alone in this. We talked for another 20 minutes. I fed her lines about my confusion over corporate bylaws, my fear of the board of directors, my desire to just make things right and retreat to a quiet life. She ate it up, offering vague assurances and patting my hand. She gave me her private number, telling me to call her anytime, day or night. As we stood to leave, she embraced me. It was a quick, awkward thing, her belly pressing between us. We'll get through this, she whispered, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. I watched her walk away, her steps confident, already the lady of the manor surveying her new domain. She believed I was a fool. She believed my grief had hollowed me out, leaving a pliable, broken shell. What she didn't understand was that the shell was just a container, and inside was a cold, patient fury, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. I got into my car, locked the doors, and finally let the mask fall. The tears were gone. The trembling stopped. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back were not those of a broken widow. They were the eyes of a strategist. The stage was set, the pawn was in play, and the queen was ready to strike. The scent of her perfume hit me first. It was the same cloying, expensive fragrance I'd found on Richard's collar. Now, it was fouling the air in my foyer. Chloe didn't just move in, she invaded. She arrived with a flurry of moving men and designer suitcases, a conquering queen taking possession of her spoils. I stood on the staircase, a silent ghost in my own home, and watched her direct the chaos. "Just put that in the master bedroom," she instructed, pointing a manicured finger toward the room that had been mine for 2 decades. My things, a small jewelry box, a stack of books on my nightstand, were unceremoniously placed in a cardboard box and set by the front door like trash waiting for collection. She didn't ask. She assumed. Her arrogance was a physical force, filling the spaces Richard had left empty. I said nothing. I played my part. I flinched when she dismissed the housekeeper. "I'll be handling things from now on." I offered a weak, trembling smile when she complained about the art in the living room, calling it dated. I was the portrait of a woman being gently, systematically erased, and she loved every minute of it. Her campaign of defamation began almost immediately. I heard it through concerned friends. "Oh, you poor dear, we heard you weren't taking it well." Chloe said Richard was so unhappy for years, it must be a relief for you, in a way, that it's over. She was painting a new reality for our social circle. She was the beloved, pregnant successor, and I was the unstable ex he'd been desperate to escape. She was building her narrative, brick by brick, and every pitying glance sent my way was another brick she thought cemented her victory. However, her greatest mistake proved to be her carelessness with what she believed was her inheritance. My company, it started small, a transfer of $50,000 from a liquid asset account to a private number she controlled. I saw the alert pop up on the financial dashboard I still monitored, a ghost in the machine she didn't know existed. My fingers, steady and cold, took a screenshot. I saved it in a folder I'd named The Reckoning. Then it was a sale of a minor, non-core patent. She sold it for a fraction of its value to a shell corporation. It was a test, I realized. She was probing the boundaries, seeing how much she could get away with. She thought the board was complacent, that the lawyers were tied up with the probate of the fraudulent will. She thought no one was watching. I was always watching. Every transaction was a spark of joy in my cold, calculated heart. She was so blinded by greed, she didn't see the trail of digital breadcrumbs she was leaving. I documented it all. I had timestamps, account numbers, and the names of the dubious entities she was funneling money through. I used the home office computer she'd claimed as her own, accessing it late at night after she'd taken her sleeping pills. The glow of the monitor, the only light on my face. I didn't just take screenshots. I downloaded full bank statements. I traced the wire transfers. I compiled a ledger of her theft that was more detailed than anything the company's own accountants possessed. She would walk past me in the morning, yawning, complaining about the quality of the coffee I'd made, completely unaware that the woman she saw as a defeated housemate was the architect of her ruin. She'd talk on the phone with her lawyer, her voice loud and confident, discussing her plans for the company, for our future. I'd just nod, my eyes downcast, clutching my mug like a lifeline. The fury inside me was no longer a hot, raging thing. It had been refined, compressed into a diamond hardpoint of pure purpose. Her arrogance was the weapon she had handed me. Every time she liquidated another asset to buy another hideous piece of art for the walls. Every time she bragged to a friend about finally getting what she deserved, she was swinging the hammer herself. She wasn't just driving nails into her own coffin. She was building the entire box while telling me how beautiful it would look. And I, the ever-obliging widow, was right there, holding the door open for her. The tremor in my voice was a work of art. I had practiced it in the mirror, the perfect blend of fragile hope and hesitant desperation. I called Chloe, my breath catching in my throat as I spoke. "I found something," I whispered into the phone. "A policy. It's a lot of money, but there's a problem. We met in the very study where I'd found her fraudulent will. The air still smelled of Richard's cologne and her cheap perfume, a nauseating combination. I sat behind his desk, my hands folded over a folder containing the insurance documents. She swept in, already acting like the lady of the house, her gaze lingering on the leather chair I occupied as if it were her rightful throne. "What is it?" she asked, her tone dripping with a boredom I knew was feigned. She was hungry for this, hungry for everything. I pushed the folder toward her. "A $5 million life insurance policy. I'm the beneficiary." I let that hang in the air, watching her eyes widen with a greed she couldn't quite conceal. Then I let my shoulders slump. "But there's a clause, a morality clause." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. What? "It's archaic, but it's there," I explained, my voice trembling with just the right amount of fear. "If the insurance company discovers the beneficiary was aware of, or complicit in, any infidelity on the part of the deceased, the entire payout can be voided. They can refuse to pay a single cent." I saw the calculations flicker behind her eyes. She was weighing the risk. Her lawyer had probably told her contesting the will I now possessed would be a long, ugly battle. But this was liquid cash. A fortune, just sitting there. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice cautious. I leaned forward, letting her see the sheen of tears in my eyes. "I'm saying we present a united front. We go to them together. We tell them we were friends, that you were my rock, that Richard's passing, while tragic, brought us together. We sign a joint affidavit stating there was no knowledge of any indiscretions. We lie to save the money." I let a single, perfect tear trace a path down my cheek. "Then we split it. 50-50. It's the only way we both get anything. It's what Richard would have wanted, for his child." I had woven the perfect web. I appealed to her greed, her self-preservation, and her twisted sense of maternity, all in one breath. The mention of her unborn child was the match. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a protective gesture that was now a weapon in my hands. She tried to look concerned for me. "But are you sure? This seems so risky for you." I gave a broken little laugh. "What do I have left to lose, Chloe? He's gone. The company is in shambles. This money, it's a fresh start, for both of us." She bought it. Of course, she bought it. She saw the tear-streaked, helpless widow, and she saw a path of least resistance to a mountain of cash. She didn't see the trap. She didn't see that her signature on that joint claim form, swearing under penalty of perjury that she was unaware of any infidelity, would be a written, legal confession of her own lies. She was attesting to her own fictional innocence, and in doing so, proving her guilt. We sat side by side at the insurance agent's office a week later. I wore a simple black dress, my face pale and free of makeup. She wore a bright, expensive outfit, a bold statement of her future prosperity. I let her do most of the talking. She was effusive, laying it on thick about our special bond and her devotion to me in my time of need. I just nodded, sniffling occasionally into a tissue. When the agent slid the forms toward us, my hand shook as I picked up the pen. I made a show of it, my signature a messy, emotional scrawl. Chloe, however, signed her name with a flourish, confident and clean. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the sound of a cell door slamming shut. I thanked the agent, my voice barely a whisper. As we walked out into the sunlight, Chloe turned to me, a triumphant, conspiratorial smile on her face. "See, that wasn't so hard. We make a good team." I managed a weak, watery smile in return. "Yes, a team." I got into my car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I watched her stand on the curb, already counting her millions. She didn't know that the call had already been made. My lawyer had already anonymously tipped off the insurance company's fraud division, providing them with the exact time and date of our meeting. The investigation was already underway. The river of money was about to be dammed, and she was standing directly in the path of the flood. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel excitement. I felt the cold, sharp satisfaction of a chess player who has just watched her opponent confidently move her queen directly into checkmate. The bait had been taken. The hook was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the line to go tight. The first call came while I was having my morning coffee. Black, no sugar, just like the resolve hardening in my veins. I watched her name flash on the screen. Chloe, frantic, pulsating beacon of her unraveling. I took a slow, deliberate sip, the bitter liquid a perfect match for my mood. The phone went silent. Then, it started again, and again. By the third call, a voicemail icon appeared. I didn't need to listen to know the tone. The shrill, panicked pitch of a trapped animal. I played it anyway, my expression flat, as I stared out the window at a world that was finally starting to make sense again. Eleanor, it's Chloe. Something's terribly wrong. Her voice was a strained whisper, laced with a fear so potent I could almost taste it. My cards, all of them, were declined at the boutique. There must be some mistake, a system error. You need to call the bank. You have to fix this. I deleted the message. The real spectacle began 2 days later. I was at the office, my office. A fact everyone was about to remember, overseeing the quiet transition of power, when my assistant's voice came through the intercom, hushed and alarmed. Ms. Thorne, there's a situation in the lobby. I didn't hurry. I finished annotating the financial report in my hand, placed my pen down neatly, and walked with a measured pace to the elevator. The doors slid open to a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos. Chloe was there, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, that expensive outfit she'd worn to the insurance meeting now looking crumpled and desperate. She was squared off against a stone-faced security guard, her voice climbing an octave with every word. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, her hands splayed over her belly. "I am the future of this company. Richard wanted me to have everything. Let me through." The employees milling about, pretending to work, were drinking in every second. This was better than any memo I could have sent. I stepped out of the elevator. The air shifted. All eyes turned to me. Chloe saw me and lunged forward, the guard barely catching her by the arm. "Eleanor, tell them I belong here." Her eyes were wild, brimming with a toxic mix of entitlement and sheer terror. I stopped a few feet from her, my hands tucked calmly into the pockets of my blazer. I let the silence hang, let everyone absorb the image. Her, hysterical and unhinged. Me, still and sovereign. "Chloe," I said, my voice low and carrying a blade wrapped in silk. "This is a place of business, not a maternity ward, and certainly not your personal ATM." A few stifled gasps came from the accounting department. Her face crumpled. "The accounts are frozen, all of them. The insurance company. They're saying the policy is under investigation for fraud." The word hit her like a physical blow, and she staggered back a step. "What did you do?" I took a single step closer. Close enough that only she could hear the ice in my whisper. I signed a form. "You signed a confession. There's a difference." The realization dawned in her eyes, slow and horrifying. The condescending smile she'd given me at the funeral was a distant memory, replaced by the gut-wrenching understanding that she had never been the player in this game. She was the pawn. "You bitch," she hissed, her voice trembling with the rage that had nowhere to go. "Security," I said, my tone returning to its normal, authoritative volume. "Escort Ms. Levine from the premises. She is not to be admitted again without my express permission." As they led her away, her protests dissolving into broken sobs, I turned and walked back toward the elevator. I didn't look back. I could feel the gaze of my employees on me, no longer looks of pity, but of respect and a little bit of fear. Good. Back in my office, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling beneath me. Another voicemail arrived. I put it on speaker. It was just crying this time. Hiccuping, ugly, hopeless sobs. The sound of a kingdom crumbling. I felt the cold, sharp satisfaction settle deeper into my bones. This wasn't the end. It was just the end of the beginning. The river of money was dammed, and she was drowning in the drought. Let her choke on the dust. My real move was still to come. The call came on a Tuesday morning, a quiet, polite interruption, in the middle of my carefully orchestrated siege. My assistant's voice was hesitant. "Mr. Gable is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Richard's accountant. The man was a ghost, a fixture in the background of financial statements and tax seasons. I'd always known him as quiet, unassuming, a man who wore the same brown suit and spoke in a near whisper. I almost dismissed it. My plight was full of venom and vengeance. I had no time for ghosts. But something in the word urgent, delivered in his name, made me pause. "Send him in." He entered my office like a man walking into a church, with a reverence that felt out of place amidst the modern chrome and glass. He didn't look at the view. He looked only at me, his eyes holding a weight I hadn't noticed before. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice firmer than I remembered. I can no longer remain silent. He sat, placing a worn leather satchel on his knees, his hands age-spotted and steady, clasped over it. "For the last 5 years, I have watched him bleed your company," he said, the words stark and unadorned. It started small, unexplained bonuses, lavish business trips to resorts. Then it became systematic, monthly wire transfers to an account under the name C. Levine. He told me it was for a confidential corporate project. I am not a foolish man. I knew. A cold fire ignited in my gut. Hearing it confirmed so bluntly was like having a wound scrubbed with salt. You knew, I repeated, my voice dangerously flat, and you did nothing. He didn't flinch. My hands were tied. He was the CEO. My job was to manage the numbers he gave me, not question their origin. To speak up would have meant my job, my pension. I have a sick wife. He looked down at his hands, a flicker of shame crossing his features. It was a coward's calculus, and I have despised myself for it. But more than that, I despised what he was doing to you. I was here when you sold your father's car. I typed the initial partnership agreement you just used to take back your company. I remember the woman who worked through the night to build this, paper by paper. You were always the engine. He was just the loudest noise. He unclasped the satchel and withdrew a single, thick ledger. It wasn't a modern printout or a flash drive. It was old school, bound in green canvas, the kind of thing no one uses anymore. This is my penance, he said, sliding it across the desk. The official books are clean, of course, scrubbed, but this is the truth. Every dollar, every cent, from the $5,000 consulting fee for her first Birkin bag to the $500,000 down payment on the condo. Dates, account numbers, backdated invoices he had me create. It's all here. I opened the ledger. The handwriting was meticulous, a testament to a life spent in orderly columns and balanced sums. And there it was, in stark, undeniable ink, the story of my betrayal, not in tears, but in transactions. $10,000 for a spa weekend. $120,000 for a sports car. $750,000 for the apartment where he'd built his second life. The numbers blurred before my eyes, not from tears, but from a rising, incandescent rage. He thought he was so clever, Mr. Gable continued, his voice dropping. But he was messy, arrogant. He kept the originals of the falsified documents. He said he might need leverage against her someday. From the satchel, he produced a thick manila envelope, the forged contracts, the backdated payment authorizations signed by him. It's all here, the proof of embezzlement you need. I looked from the ledger to the envelope, then back to his weary, resolved face. This wasn't just an ally. This was a deliverance. He had given me the sword, and now he had handed me the shield. Why now? I asked, my throat tight. Because you fought back, he said simply. I watched you let that woman into your home. I saw you play the grieving widow, and I thought you were broken. I was ashamed for you. Then you walked into that boardroom and revealed the partnership agreement. You showed your teeth. It gave me the courage to finally show mine. I stood, walking around the desk. I extended my hand. He stood and took it, his grip surprisingly strong. Thank you, Mr. Gable. It is the very least I could do, Eleanor, he said, using my first name for the first time in 20 years. Finish it. He left as quietly as he came, a ghost granting me a tangible, devastating power. I sat back down, the weight of the ledger and the envelope solid and real in my hands. The cold fury that had been my constant companion now had a new, sharper edge. This was no longer about reclaiming what was mine, that was already done. This was about annihilation. With this, I wouldn't just be taking her future. I would be erasing her past. Every gift, every luxury, every lie she'd built her life upon would be exposed as stolen property. The final move was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. And I held every single card. The manila envelope from Mr. Gable felt like a block of pure, condensed justice in my hands. It wasn't just paper. It was a timeline of my betrayal, a ledger of my stolen life, and now, the blueprint for her ruin. I spent the night cross-referencing his secret records with the company's official books. Every entry was a story. A $50,000 consulting fee dated the same week. Chloe had flaunted a new diamond bracelet, a marketing retreat in Bora Bora that coincided with Richard's sudden interest in scouting tropical locations. The cold in my chest, the ice that had formed at the funeral, was now a glacial core, sharp and unyielding. My lawyer, a pit bull named Susan who appreciated a good bloodletting, was ecstatic. Eleanor, this is beyond a smoking gun. This is the whole arsenal. Her voice was a low, satisfied hum over the phone. We're not just calling a board meeting, we're staging an execution. The legal notice was delivered to Chloe by a stone-faced process server at Minnow, our home. I watched from the upstairs window as she tore open the envelope on the front steps. I saw the initial confusion, then the dawning arrogance. She probably thought it was a formality, a final step before she was handed the keys to the kingdom. She looked up, scanning the windows, and for a fleeting second, her eyes met mine. She offered that same condescending, pitying smile. I didn't smile back. I didn't blink. I just watched her, a predator, observing its prey celebrating on the trapdoor. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate precision, a severe, black, Alexander McQueen suit one Richard had always hated, saying it was too sharp. My hair was pulled back in a tight chignon, my makeup flawless and armor-like. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a widow. I saw a CEO. I saw a founder. I saw the 51% shareholder. The walk into the corporate headquarters was a surreal parade. Employees I'd known for decades offered muted, sympathetic nods. They saw the black suit and saw a mourner. They had no idea they were looking at the architect of the day's earthquake. The boardroom door loomed ahead, a slab of polished mahogany. I could hear the low murmur of voices inside. I took a single, deep breath. The ice in my chest spread, steadying my hands, clearing my vision. This was it. I pushed the door open. Every head turned. The acting CEO, a sycophant named Robert, who had always been Richard's yes-man, gave me a patronizingly sad look. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, and there, sitting in what had been Richard's chair at the head of the table, was Chloe. She was flanked by her lawyer, a slick-looking man I didn't recognize. She had the audacity to look resplendent, dressed in a flowing, expensive silk dress, her hand resting possessively on her belly. The performance was still running. "Eleanor," Robert began, his voice dripping with false condolence, "thank you for coming. We all know this is difficult, but we must attend to company business, as per Richard's last will and testament." He gestured to Chloe's lawyer, who produced a bound copy of the fraudulent document. I didn't sit. I stood at the foot of the table, my leather portfolio clutched in my hands. I let Robert read the will aloud. I let him detail how control of the company, my company, was to be passed to Chloe and her unborn child. I watched the satisfaction bloom on her face. She looked at me, expecting to see shattering grief. She saw only calm. Robert finished. "So, pending probate, it is the board's duty to—" I cut him off. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. "That document is a forgery." A stunned silence. Chloe's smile didn't falter. It just tightened. "Eleanor, grief does strange things to the mind," she said, her tone sweetly poisonous. "We all understand." I ignored her. I unzipped my portfolio. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out a single, aged piece of paper. I slid it down the polished tabletop. It sailed past Robert, past Chloe's gaping lawyer, and came to a stop right in front of Robert. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That," I said, "is the original partnership agreement from 1998. The one Richard told everyone was destroyed in a fire. It stipulates that I, Eleanor Reed, am the 51% majority silent partner in this company. I have always been the controlling interest." The room erupted. Robert's face went ashen as he scanned the document, his fingers trembling. Chloe's composure finally cracked. "That's impossible," Richard said. "He said he bought you out years ago." "That's a lie." I let the chaos swirl for a moment, let them drown in the sudden shift of power. Then I reached back into my portfolio and pulled out the manila envelope. "This," I announced, my voice rising above the din, "is a record of every dollar Richard embezzled from this company to fund Ms. Chloe's lavish lifestyle. The condo, the car, the monthly allowances, it's all here. Backdated authorizations, forged contracts." I looked directly at Robert and another board member, Frank, and it was facilitated with the knowing assistance of two members of this very board. I turned my gaze to Chloe. The color had drained from her face, the silk dress suddenly looking like a shroud. The triumph in her eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, animal panic. She wasn't a queen. She was a thief caught in the spotlight. "The storm isn't coming, gentlemen," I said, my voice dropping back to a deadly calm. "It has arrived. And my first act as majority owner is to call for a vote to remove Robert and Frank from this board for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The trap had sprung, and she was right in the middle of it. The boardroom air, still thick with the scent of her expensive perfume and the memory of unearned victory, crackled with renewed tension as Chloe swept back in. Her lawyer, a dutiful shadow, followed in her wake as she moved with purpose toward the head of the table, the seat that had always been Richard's, and by extension, should have been mine. That smug little smile was still plastered on her face, a mask of triumph she'd worn since the funeral. And she didn't even look at me as she prepared to claim a crown she believed was already hers. I let her have it. I let the acting CEO, a nervous man named Robert, clear his throat and read aloud the fraudulent will. I watched her absorb every word, her smile widening as Richard's voice from the grave bequeathed her his empire, his company, our life. She leaned back, one hand resting on her stomach, the picture of a rightful heir. This was her moment. I gave it to her. It was the last thing I would ever give her. The room was filled with murmurs, a mixture of shock and sycophantic approval from the board members Richard had cultivated. Robert finished reading and looked at Chloe, ready to hand her the keys. That's when I moved. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into the leather portfolio on my lap. The sound of the zipper was unnaturally loud in the hush. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, slightly yellowed with age, its notary seal a dark, undeniable blot of red. I slid it across the polished mahogany table. It traveled like a glacier, slow and inexorable, past Chloe's gaping lawyer, and came to a stop right in front of Robert. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension, "is the original partnership agreement from 1998, the one Richard told everyone was destroyed in a fire. It stipulates that I, Eleanor Reed, am the 51% majority silent partner in this company. I have always been the controlling interest." The room didn't just go silent, it went dead. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Robert's face went ashen as he scanned the document, his fingers trembling as they traced the signatures, my bold, hopeful script next to Richard's ambitious scrawl. Chloe's composure finally cracked. "That's impossible," she shrieked, her voice shrill. "Richard said he bought you out years ago. That's a lie. It has to be a forgery." I let the chaos swirl for a moment, let them drown in the sudden, violent shift of power. I watched the panic dawn in her eyes, the slow, dawning realization that the ground had vanished from beneath her feet. Then I reached back into my portfolio and pulled out the thick, damning manila envelope. "This," I announced, my voice rising above the din with an authority I hadn't used in years, "is a record of every dollar Richard embezzled from this company to fund Ms. Chloe's lavish lifestyle. The condo, the car, the monthly allowances that surpassed my own household budget. It's all here. Backdated authorizations, forged contracts, wire transfers to accounts he opened in her name." I let my gaze, cold and sharp, travel to Robert and another board member, Frank. And it was all facilitated with the knowing assistance of 2 members of this very board. I turned my full attention to Chloe. The color had drained from her face, leaving her expertly applied makeup looking like a garish mask. The silk dress, which had screamed of wealth and status moments before, now looked like a shroud. The triumph in her eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, animal panic. She wasn't a queen. She was a common thief, caught in the blinding spotlight of her own greed. "The storm isn't coming, gentlemen," I said, my voice dropping back to a deadly, controlled calm. "The eye of the hurricane. It has arrived. And my first act as majority owner is to call for a vote to remove Robert and Frank from this board for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world ending. Theirs. Robert opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Frank just stared at the table, defeated. Chloe looked from them to me, her mind racing, searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. She was cornered. The trap I had built with my own pain and patience had finally sprung, and she was right in the middle of it, watching the jaws snap shut. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched. This was better than any tearful confession. This was justice. Cold, hard, and exactly as I had designed it. The fallout was immediate and public. My lawyer, a pit bull in a tailored suit, released Mr. Gable's evidence to the press, and the district attorney in a coordinated strike. The story wasn't about a grieving mistress anymore. It was about a calculated conspiracy to defraud a company. The business journals, which had once fawned over Richard's vision, now called it a hostile takeover from the grave. I savored the phrase. It was perfect. Chloe's carefully crafted image shattered overnight. The paparazzi, who had once snapped pictures of her as the tragic, expectant lover, now hounded her as a common criminal. I saw the footage on the evening news, her, head down, hiding behind oversized sunglasses, as she rushed from her condo, my husband's condo, to her lawyer's office. The narrative had flipped. She was no longer a victim. She was the architect of her own ruin. The public's pity curdled into outrage. They felt duped. They had cried for a villain they'd mistaken for a saint. But the public spectacle was just the noise. The real work was happening in the silent, wood-paneled offices of the district attorney. The evidence was a slam dunk. Mr. Gable's ledgers were a work of art, a meticulous map of theft. Every wire transfer, every forged invoice for consulting services that were never rendered, every backdated authorization Richard had signed in his desperate attempts to buy her love. It was all there. The DA didn't even hesitate. Criminal charges were filed. Conspiracy, grand larceny, fraud. The wheels of justice, so often slow, were greased by the sheer audacious scale of the crime. I watched it all from the epicenter of the calm I had created. My home was silent again. Her gaudy perfumes and designer shoes were gone, the spaces she had invaded now feeling cleansed. My phone, however, was it started with a single, frantic text. Then another. Then a cascade of them, each one more unhinged than the last. Asterisk, you set me up. Asterisk, asterisk, we need to talk. Richard would be disgusted by you. Asterisk, asterisk, I'm carrying his child. You can't do this. Asterisk, I never replied. I just saved every message, every voicemail, where her voice cracked from faux grief to sheer, undiluted panic. They were more confessions, adding to the mountain I had already built. Her calls became a soundtrack to my mornings, a satisfying reminder that the noose was tightening. Then came the final, desperate move. My lawyer called, his tone a mixture of weariness and grim satisfaction. She's fighting the paternity test, he said, claiming it's a violation of her and the unborn child's rights. She's filing a motion to block it. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. Her resistance was the proof I didn't know I needed. A truly grieving, innocent woman would have welcomed the test. She would have wanted the world to know her child was a part of the man she loved. Fighting it, that was the act of someone with everything to hide. We proceed, I told him, my voice flat. Make the argument to the judge that the legitimacy of the heir is the cornerstone of her entire claim. It goes to the heart of the fraud. The hearing was a brief, brutal affair. Her lawyer sputtered about harassment and emotional distress. My lawyer simply presented the facts. A woman who had built her entire financial and legal case on her relationship to a deceased man was now refusing to prove the most fundamental biological link. The judge, a stern woman with tired eyes, saw through the charade in minutes. She denied Chloe's motion and ordered the test be conducted immediately. I wasn't in the room when they swabbed her cheek. I didn't need to be. I was in my study, looking out at the city my company helped build. I felt a profound stillness. This was the final card about to be turned over. This was the moment her house of cards, built on my husband's lies and her own bottomless greed, would collapse into dust. The public thought the embezzlement charges were the main event. They had no idea. The paternity results were the checkmate move waiting in the shadows, and I was the only player who knew the game was already over. The checkmate move was a court-ordered paternity test. My lawyer argued that the legitimacy of the heir was central to the fraud case. Chloe fought it, but the judge agreed. When the results came back, they confirmed my deepest suspicion. Richard was not the father. My lawyer, Alan, called me with the news. His voice was a monotone of professional satisfaction. The results are in. Zero probability of paternity. I didn't react at first. I was standing in the middle of my newly reclaimed living room, the one Chloe had tried to decorate in her tacky, gilded style. I'd just finished putting a family photo back on the mantelpiece. I see, I said, my voice eerily calm. There's more, Alan continued. The lab, following procedure, ran the sample against other potential familial matches in their database. It's a long shot, but sometimes ... Well, it hit on a relative, a first cousin. I walked to the window, the phone pressed to my ear. Whose cousin? Not Richard's, Alan said, and I could almost hear his grim smile through the line. The match is to a man named Robert Durning. He's a junior partner at the very law firm that notarized the fraudulent will. Chloe's friend's firm. The pieces, the final, missing pieces, clicked into place with such force it stole my breath. It wasn't just an affair. It was a partnership, a sick, twisted conspiracy from the very beginning. She hadn't just been his mistress. She had been planted there. The baby was never meant to be Richard's heir. It was a tool, a biological weapon designed to legitimize the theft of my entire life. Robert Durning. The name meant nothing to me, and yet, it meant everything. I gave Alan one simple instruction. Leak it. All of it. To the press, to the district attorney. I want this to hit before the sun goes down. Her entire claim, her entire identity, was built on a lie. And now, so is his. The fallout was nuclear. The story exploded online before the evening news even picked it up. The headline wasn't just about a fraudulent will anymore. It was a sordid thriller. Mistress's love child, fathered by co-conspirator in multi-million-dollar inheritance scheme. The business journals that had once sympathetically covered Richard's death now ran photos of Chloe and a grainy picture of Robert Durning, his face a mask of shock as reporters ambushed him outside his office. I watched it all from the silent, sterile calm of my corporate office. The fraudulent will was invalidated by noon the next day. The criminal charges weren't just filed against her anymore. They were expanded to include conspiracy, wire fraud, and against Robert Durning, forgery, and ethical violations that would see him disbarred at best, imprisoned at worst. I thought the embezzlement evidence was the kill shot. This was the annihilation. The public's pity for the pregnant, grieving mistress curdled into vitriolic fury. She was no longer a victim. She was a master manipulator, a predator. I had one final call to make. I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice a ragged, desperate thing. "You," she hissed. "You did this." "Did what, Chloe?" I asked, my tone flat, conversational. "I didn't tell you to get pregnant by your accomplice. I didn't tell you to forge your will. I just uncovered what you already were." She was crying now, ugly, heaving sobs. "I have nothing." They froze everything. The condo, the accounts. They're talking about prison. I let the silence hang between us, a vast, cold expanse. I could hear the echo of her theatrical sobs from my husband's funeral. These were different. These were real. "You tried to steal a life you didn't build," I said, each word a precise, measured blow. "You thought I was just the wife, the background noise. You never understood that I was the foundation. And when you try to steal a house by dismantling the foundation, the whole thing collapses on top of you." I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call. I placed the phone gently on my desk and looked out at the city skyline, the one I had helped build from a single, crazy idea, and my father's classic car. The ice in my chest, the cold that had taken root at Richard's funeral, finally began to thaw. It was over. They had started a war when they thought I wasn't looking. And I had not just ended it. I had salted the earth where they stood, ensuring nothing would ever grow there again. The final, public unraveling was a spectacle of pure, unadulterated shock. Chloe's fall wasn't just swift. It was a meteorite crashing to earth, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater where her fabricated life had been. The legal fees alone would have buried her, but it was the public disgrace that salted the earth. The condo, a sleek glass box Richard had bought her with my money, was seized by the courts as proceeds of crime. I watched from my car as they emptied it, her gaudy art and designer clothes hauled away like common trash. The sports car, a cherry red symbol of their affair, was repossessed right from her parking spot. She stood on the curb, screaming at the tow truck driver, but her tears had lost their power. No one was watching her performance anymore. The friends who had once clucked around her, offering condolences in casseroles, vanished. Their social media profiles were scrubbed of photos with her. They didn't just shun her. They acted as if they had never known her, as if her very name was a contagion. The phone stopped ringing. The doorbell fell silent. She was utterly, completely alone. I, however, was not. The phone on my desk became a conduit of power. Calls from journalists, all wanting my side of the corporate Cinderella story, as one had put it. I gave polite, measured statements, always framing it as a matter of corporate governance and fiduciary duty. I never mentioned her name. I didn't have to. My silence on her was more damning than any curse. Then came the day I had been waiting for. A courier delivered a thick manila envelope. Inside were the final, signed documents from the district attorney's office. Criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy had been formally filed against Chloe and her notary friend. A separate civil suit from the company for embezzlement was proceeding, a case built on Mr. Gable's meticulous ledgers. She wasn't just facing financial ruin, she was facing years in a cell. My lawyer, a stoic man named Arthur, stood in my office. "It's done," he said, placing the final paternity test results on my desk, the official court-admitted copy that stated, in cold, clinical terms, that Richard was definitively not the father. "The fraudulent will has been completely invalidated. There is no claim left for her to make. She has nothing." I picked up the paper. It felt heavier than it should have. This wasn't just a document, it was the final brick in the wall I had built around my former life, sealing it off forever. Thank you, Arthur. He left, and I was alone with the quiet hum of my rebuilt empire. I looked out at the skyline, the same view I'd had during that final phone call with her. The ice was gone, replaced by a warm, steady thrum of control. This was my city, my company, my life. A week later, another envelope arrived, this one marked personal and confidential. It was a handwritten letter from Chloe. The script was sloppy, desperate, the ink blotted in places as if by tears. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She begged for money. Just a small settlement, she wrote, just enough to disappear, to start over somewhere no one knew her name. She said she was living in a motel on the outskirts of town, that she had nothing left. I read it twice. The first time, I looked for any hint of the condescending smile she'd given me at the funeral. There was none. The second time, I looked for any shred of genuine remorse. I found only fear. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had lost. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't tear it up. I simply folded it back into its envelope and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, next to the original partnership agreement that had started it all. It was a relic, a trophy, proof that the foundation, once shaken, had held firm. I felt no pity, no hate, just a profound, unshakable sense of finality. She had asked me for a future, but she had tried to steal mine, and in the economy of vengeance, that was a debt that could only be settled with absolute zero. Let her rot in the consequences. I had a company to run. I reclaimed my life and my company. The first official act was a purge. I stood in the lobby the morning after the board meeting and watched as two workers carefully pried Richard's name from the marble masthead. The screech of the adhesive giving way was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. It wasn't an act of erasure, but of correction. This company was my child long before it was his legacy, and I was finally cutting out the malignant growth. The corporate restructuring was my symphony, and I was the conductor. I promoted Maria from accounting to CFO, the woman who had once slipped me a note during a company party that read, "I see you." I fired the two VPs who had sat in that boardroom, their faces slack with shock, and who had knowingly enabled Richard's embezzlement for a cut of the profits. Their security escorts out of the building were a public spectacle, a message to everyone who remained. The era of backroom deals and blind loyalty to a ghost was over. With every smart decision, with every policy I implemented that favored integrity over ruthless profit, I felt my own power returning. It was a physical sensation, like warmth flooding back into a frozen limb, washing away the years of being made to feel small and invisible. I wasn't just Richard's widow. I was the founder and CEO of my own empire. My new office was no longer the one Richard had designed, a cold, masculine space of dark wood and ego. I moved into a corner, suite filled with light. The first thing I placed on the clean, modern desk was the original, slightly singed partnership agreement from 1998, framed. It wasn't a sentimental piece. It was a weapon on display, a reminder to myself and anyone who entered of the foundation upon which this all was built. My foundation. The work was a brutal, beautiful catharsis. I dove into the ledgers, not with grief, but with the sharp focus of a surgeon cutting away disease. I found the remnants of Richard's and Chloe's schemes, the dummy accounts, the inflated invoices for consulting services that were just payments for her condo. I authorized lawsuits to claw back every cent. My lawyers were sharks, and I was the one who had finally unchained them. The business press, which had once painted me as the pitiable, clueless wife, now ran profiles calling me the avenging architect and the shareholders' storm. I didn't grant them interviews, let them watch from the outside. The only approval I needed was the steady upward climb of our stock price. Months bled into a new rhythm. The silence in my penthouse was no longer sharp and accusing. It was peaceful. It was mine. I'd had every piece of furniture, every rug, every painting Richard had chosen hauled away and sold at auction. I replaced it all with pieces I loved, clean lines, bold colors, art that spoke to me, not to his idea of status. I slept through the night. I woke up without that familiar, cold stone of betrayal in my gut. Instead, there was a quiet, thrumming certainty. One evening, I stood at my new floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city lights glittering like a field of scattered diamonds. This was the same view I'd had during that final, fateful phone call with Chloe, when I'd pretended to be a broken woman. The ice that had encased my heart for so long was gone, replaced by this warm, steady hum of absolute control. This was my city, my company, my life. Every light below represented a story, a struggle, a dream. Mine was no longer one of subjugation. It was a testament to the fact that you should never, ever mistake a queen's strategic retreat for a surrender. They had tried to bury me. They didn't realize they were planting a seed, and from that bitter soil, I had grown into something unshakable. A month later, the call came. Not to my office, but to my private cell, a number she must have scraped from some old discarded phone of Richard's. My assistant's voice was carefully neutral. She's insistent. She says she just wants 5 minutes. I knew it was coming. The public disgrace, the frozen accounts, the mountain of legal fees. It was a mathematical equation with only one possible sum: total ruin. I had her exactly where I wanted her. And so, I agreed. I didn't meet her in my sleek new corner office with its panoramic view of my kingdom. That was a victory lap I had no interest in sharing with her. Instead, I chose a sterile, anonymous conference room in my lawyer's building. The walls were beige, the air smelled of sanitized nothing, and the large mahogany table felt like a moat between us. I arrived first. I sat at the head of the table, my back to the door, and waited. I wanted to feel her enter. I wanted to hear the hope die in her first, tentative breath. The door clicked open. I didn't turn. Her footsteps were soft, hesitant, on the plush carpet. I finally looked over my shoulder as she reached the other end of the table. The sight was almost jarring. The woman who had sobbed so theatrically at my husband's funeral, who had draped herself in my home and my life with such brazen ownership, was gone. In her place stood a ghost. Her hair was lank, pulled into a careless ponytail. The expensive, tailored maternity clothes were replaced by a faded, shapeless dress. The diamond tennis bracelet Richard had bought her was conspicuously absent from her thin wrist. Her face, devoid of its usual artful makeup, was pale and etched with a deep, tired fear. The arrogance had been hollowed out, leaving only a desperate, brittle shell. She didn't sit. She stood there, her hands gripping the back of the chair as if it were the only thing holding her up. "Thank you for seeing me," she began, her voice a raspy whisper. I said nothing. I just watched her, my expression a calm, unreadable mask. My silence was a weapon I had mastered. It unnerved her. She flinched, her gaze dropping to the polished tabletop. I know you have no reason to help me. I know what I did was unforgivable." She took a shaky breath. "But I have nothing. The legal bills, the lawsuits, everything is gone. The condo, the car, all of it. I'm facing eviction. I have nowhere to go." Still, I remained quiet. Let her lay it all out. Let her beg. "I'm not asking for much," she pleaded, her voice gaining a frantic edge. Just enough to start over. A small settlement, something to get an apartment, to live on, until I can find a job. That's all. Please, you have everything now. You won. What's a few $1,000s to you?" Her words hung in the sterile air. You won. She still saw this as a game, one she had lost. She didn't understand. It was a war I had ended. My victory wasn't in taking what was mine. It was in the absolute, unassailable peace that followed. I looked at her, this woman who had tried to architect my destruction. I searched for the familiar burn of hatred, for the icy shard of betrayal that had lived in my chest for so long. But I felt nothing, not an ounce of pity, not a flicker of hate. There was just a quiet, profound finality. A chapter closed, a lock clicked shut. She mistook my silence for consideration. A tiny, pathetic spark of hope lit in her red-rimmed eyes. "Just enough to start over," she whispered again, as if it were a prayer. That was my cue. There were no words left to say. No grand speech, no triumphant declaration. Any words I offered would be a gift, an acknowledgement that she still mattered enough to deserve my energy. She didn't deserve even that much consideration. My silence had said everything that needed to be said. I slowly pushed my chair back. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I stood, smoothing the non-existent wrinkle from my tailored jacket. I didn't look at her pleading face. I didn't acknowledge her shattered presence. I turned my back on her, just as she and Richard had turned their backs on me. I walked to the door, my steps even and sure. I didn't hurry. I opened it and stepped through into the bright, quiet hallway, not once looking back. I pulled the door shut behind me, the solid thud of the latch echoing with a sense of perfect, permanent closure. I left her in that beige room, alone with the devastating consequences of her own greed. I left her with nothing, not even my scorn. It was the most complete victory of all. I run the company now, and it's more successful than ever. The first thing I did was remove Richard's name from the building's granite facade. Watching those brass letters come down was more cathartic than any tear I ever shed for him. The company needed a new name, a new identity. I chose Athena Holdings, forged in strategy and righteous war. It was mine, from the ground up, all over again. My life is finally my own, built on my own terms, not in the shadow of a man's betrayal. I wake up to a silence that is mine. I drink my coffee looking out at a city I no longer have to share with a ghost. The boardroom, once a stage for his ego and my humiliation, is now my command center. I promoted Mr. Gable to Chief Financial Officer. Loyalty, I've learned, is the only currency that never depreciates. The two board members who enabled Richard, they were voted out in a move so swift it made the business pages shudder. I didn't just fire them. I dismantled their reputations with the very evidence they helped create. There's a certain poetry in that. I found a strength I never knew I had, forged in the fire of injustice. It's a cold, clean kind of power. It doesn't come from shouting or posturing. It comes from the quiet click of a briefcase closing, from the single nod that sets a multi-million-dollar deal into motion. My employees don't see a widow. They see a CEO who took back her empire with the precision of a master tactician. They respect the fight in my eyes. They've heard the stories, of course. The media dubbed it the shareholder's grave, a hostile takeover from beyond the grave. I rather like the name. Sometimes, I allow myself to walk through the empty halls of the house I once shared with Richard. I sold it, of course. Every corner held the echo of his lies. But before the new owners moved in, I'd go there. I'd stand in the grand living room, where Chloe had once draped herself over my furniture, and I'd feel nothing but the solid floor beneath my feet. They tried to erase me from my own story. They thought they could write me out of the narrative, a sad, forgotten prologue to their grand romance. But I was the one holding the pen all along. Every sacrifice, every late night, every dollar of my father's legacy I invested, that was the ink. Their betrayal was merely the plot twist that made the final victory so satisfying. I read the comments sometimes, the emails, the messages on the business profiles. People ask if I'm happy. Happiness is too small a word for what I feel. This is vindication. This is peace. This is the deep, resonant calm that comes after a storm. You not only survived, but harnessed. Someone sent me a link to a gossip blog last week. There was a grainy photo of Chloe, working a cash register at a discount store on the outskirts of the city. Her face was drawn, the glamour long gone. I felt a flicker then, not of pity, but of recognition. That was the life she had tried to consign me to. The universe, with my very direct assistance, had simply handed it back to her. So, I run my company. I sit at the head of the table I bought. I sign the documents that bear the name I built. The ghost of Richard is gone, exorcised by court orders and financial statements. The specter of Chloe is just a cautionary tale. My story is no longer about them. It's about the quiet power of a plan perfectly executed. It's about the satisfaction of a balance sheet that finally, truly, balances. And you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have crumbled? Would you have taken a small settlement and faded away, letting them win? Or would you have dug your heels into the earth, reached into the past for the one piece of paper that held your entire history, and fought? Would you have had the patience to play the fool, to let your enemy's arrogance become the very weapon you used to destroy her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because my story is over, but the lesson remains. Never, ever underestimate the quiet one. She's usually the one holding all the cards, and in my case, I was holding the original, notarized deed to the entire table.